problem. I just...
You know where they are?
Perfect.
So we start on the hour.
Yeah. Chance if you're in the wrong room. Basically, whenever we hit the right on the hour, I'm going to play the video, so that'll be perfect. Thank you.
We may as well just lower them. Are you going to have them lower the whole time, or just?
No, it's just for 1 minute while I play the starting video, which I'll play right on the hour.
Wonderful.
Yeah, it's like a really short.
Wonderful.
It's just kind of a, slickly produced thing that I figured I might as well enjoy using. So everybody should be getting a postcard. This is a free download of How to Write a Novel, which is my novel writing book, which I'm teaching from today. So for coming to the panel, you get the whole book free. You're welcome. You can thank Inkit. It's courtesy of my publisher.
If you are just joining us, all right, they got some volume there, fantastic. If you are just joining us, we want to let you know that the exit is in the rear corner of the room there. Please make sure to check underneath you if you do need to exit. Cell phones, tablets, and all sorts of shiny, expensive things fall out of your pockets in your bags while you're seated in here. We also want to let you know the nearest restroom is actually behind this room. So go out that door, back that way, and you can come back into the panel if you need to during the panel. We also would love to ask for your help with something. Are you all having a good time at the convention so far? Wonderful. We are so glad to hear that. If you would do us the kind favor of sending some feedback in, you can use the generic website email address info@comiccon.org and let them know how much you love the programming here, especially in this room. That's one of the ways that we get to continue to have such great programming, and we would love to have folks back here. So if you really enjoy this panel that you're about to sit through, please shoot an email and let the powers that be know so that we can continue to do it again. Again, we are very glad to have you here, and without further ado, we are going to enjoy this wonderful concept panel, Concept to Reality, with Bryan Thomas Schmidt, and I'll hit the lights for you, sir.
All right. So you say you want to write a novel. You've got a story that just has to be told. You dream of the day you can walk into your local bookstore or library and pull your book off the shelf. The heavy, oversized wood door slam behind John with a thump, and click the metal knob. Scenes are more dramatic when they start tense in moments of action. People become in our minds what we see them do. So first thing first, your character is what he or she does. To work well and increase dramatic tension, all scenes must end badly. End of the story. And imagine the scenes you're going to need to get them. Do you need the whole forest or just one tree? Determining this depends on which is best for the particular story. Well, writing a novel is a lot of work. It takes a specific craft and skill set, and I'm here to teach you those skills. Inkett's Novel Writing Boot Camp. Do you have what it takes? Come join the adventure. Can you tell when I made that narration? I know, I was just saying, can you tell that I was listening to the Olympics when I made that? I totally was, and I was like, oh man, I sound just like the Olympic people, in the video. Anyway, I did this whole video series of 10-minute videos. There's like 10 or 12 of them that teach concepts of writing, and then they asked me to write how to write a novel. So what I'm teaching you today is stuff from that. I guess, I don't know how to turn that off, so I guess we're going to get these little, you're going to know all the podcasts I follow, I guess. Anyway, I'm Bryan Thomas Schmidt. I'm the editor of The Martian. That's my most famous thing, although I've edited 13 anthologies. I've edited hundreds of novels and short stories. I have several novels out myself. I've written official Predator and X-Files tie-in fiction. I've just sold a book to Hollywood that they're going to make into a movie. Got some screenplays I've done. So I've done a bunch of different things. Yeah, I also went to film school and did a bunch of, in the old days, worked for Biography and a bunch of old shows. So I've done a bunch of different things. So I'm here today to teach you basically how to jumpstart your writing process. So hopefully most of you are writers. It doesn't matter whether we're talking about novels or short stories, though, for what I'm going to teach you today, because what I'm teaching you are some basic techniques to take your concept and get key plot points that will help you then start writing. Okay? So that's what we're going to do. So basically, the first thing I'm going to teach you is the classic structure that was put forward by a guy named Sid Field in a book called Screenplay. This is pretty much the structure that when I was in film school in the 80s and early 90s, they were teaching pretty much everybody. A lot of things have evolved since then, so I'll teach you another structure after this, but this is pretty much the structure that a lot of Hollywood films follow. You can almost I can fit any novel or movie into this story structure, all right? And so I'm going to go through it bit by bit. All of the diagrams are available in the book. Also, my website on my blog this week is not only a download link for the book in case you lose your postcard, but there's a 3-part series where I'm basically printing up everything I'm teaching to you in blog posts, okay, in 3 parts. So today the first 2 are already up. So if you need it, you just go to BryanThomasSchmidt.net, go to the blog link, they're right there. And so the diagrams are there as well. Anyway, 3-act structure, as you can see, we've got the 3 acts here, and they're divided by plot points, all right? The key turning points between acts are events which force the protagonist, and sometimes your antagonist, to turn in new directions, to take action in pursuit of resolving whatever the conflict or the quest is, okay? So these are things that require agency on the part of the characters, okay? It means they have to do something. They have to, get off their butt, leave the house, and go and do something, okay? So those are the key points that divide your acts. Now, at the beginning, you'll see inciting incident. We're going to go back to that real quick. The inciting incident is basically the first thing that happens that basically sets your story rolling, okay? The Imperials in Star Wars A New Hope, I hope everybody's familiar with that. The Imperials attack the rebel ship, and the plans are at risk for the Death Star, so Leia has to send them with a droid off the ship. The droid lands on Tatooine, found by Luke. Now we have the whole story. You get what I'm saying? That's an inciting incident, okay? So basically the inciting incident is in Silence of the Lambs. It's when Clarice Starling, the FBI agent, meets with Hannibal Lecter for the first time, and that confrontation intrigues her and sucks her into this whole mystery that she has to find the answers to, okay? When Indiana Jones loses the golden idol that he just got out of the temple and escaped that boulder, you know, when he loses that to Belloc, the French competitor, that's the inciting incident of Raiders of the Lost Ark. So I'm using movies as examples because I think movies are often more familiar in some cases than specific novels. They're just a bigger audience. But same thing applies with novels too. Like in another example is in The Sixth Sense, the inciting incident is the opening confrontation and gunshot. You have that. Without that, you don't have the rest of the film. So the inciting incident is an event or development that kind of leads to the rest of the story. So it doesn't necessarily, it can indirectly or directly require agency. It doesn't necessarily have to require agency, but it certainly spurns people forward to respond, okay? So that's what that is. So basically your inciting incident is in your first, if you've got a screenplay, it's in your first 10 pages. If it's in your novel, it's in the first probably 2, 3 to 4 chapters, okay? And it's gonna get everything going and set you up and develop you in Act 1 and launch your story. Your story goes along, you're setting up your characters, you're setting up your world, various things are happening. Then you get to plot point 1. And plot point 1 in Star Wars is when Kenobi tells Luke they've got to go rescue the princess together and deliver those plans. And Luke's like, my uncle and aunt have just died. Wait a minute, I can't go with you. And, you know, that's plot point 1, because when Luke goes with him, the whole rest of the adventure starts. Luke has to have the courage to say, okay, I'm gonna go. I'm gonna do this. Okay? Okay, and then you launch into Act 2. Now, typically, in 3-act structure, everything is divided into there's 3 sections, but the first act is basically a fourth of your length. The second act is half, 50%. And the third is another fourth. So if you're talking 120 pages, 30, 60, and 30. Get what I'm saying? That's typically how it works out. Now, it's never going to work out, or rarely work out exactly with, like, you know, it's exactly 30 pages. You know, you don't just write a screenplay to 30 pages and say, okay, well, that's got to be my Act 1, so I've got to now move on. You got to make sure you actually have your plot point, and sometimes it'll be at 35 pages, sometimes it's at 23. It's not an exact science, but it roughly works out, okay? So if anybody's a literalist, don't take it too literally. Actually, believe it or not, I run into writers like that all the time, so that's why I actually say these things. It actually is a point. In your first half of Act 1, which is, again, a fourth, you basically have an ascending arc, okay? The ascending arc of the character trying to figure out what's going on, learning all these different things about what is happening with them. And basically, the character is kind of trying to figure out and get motivated, you know, what do I need to do to fix this? Okay, that kind of thing is going on. So that takes them to the midpoint, and the midpoint is, in Star Wars, the detention block rescue, when they're trapped and they kind of have to make some decisions and change their plan, you know. And, you know, Luke has to step up and lead the way and kind of, you know, let's fight our way clear and get out of here and take these plans back, kind of thing is when it happens. Midpoints are generally points where characters kind of make a self-realization. In the film Rocky, for example, which I'll talk about more in a bit, you know, there's a realization that Rocky has that his insecurity, because his father told him he'd never amount to anything, is holding him back, and he has to overcome that, and he has to believe in himself, and that changes the whole rest of the film. So that's what a midpoint is for. It's usually a character moment. It can be internal rather than external, but it's a key moment for the character where the character realizes they've got what it takes and they've got to now take action and move on, okay? So then you have the descending arc starting. And the descending arc goes all the way through the second half of Act 2 to the climax, as you see on the chart. And the second half of that basically ends in plot point 2. Now, plot point 2 in Star Wars is when they fight their way clear, and, you know, after Ben is killed, they fight and they escape and they head back to the Rebel base from the Death Star in Star Wars, okay? Now, you'll see pinch on there. I wasn't really going to talk about pinch, but I guess I probably should since I use that diagram. The pinches are basically your midpoints of each half of Act 2. And again, they function like a midpoint of your actual story. Kind of, they can be internal or external. They're kind of a realization moment that happens for a character. Not really the most important part. The plot points are the most important part, the climax of the inciting incident. Okay. Again, the ending of the story, just like the inciting incident, you have that final confrontation, you have that climax where the confrontation is either a fight or, the battle for destroy the Death Star, or some moment where the person steps up and faces whatever the antagonist is, or whatever is holding him back to basically, complete the journey and have victory. That is the climax of your story that you're working toward. So basically, if you can identify plot point 1, plot point 2, your inciting incident, and your climax, you have a lot to work with in writing your story. Because those key incidents are the driving incidents of your story, and everything else will move around those and flow from them. So the idea is to give you a structure or a paradigm which you can use to basically take your basic idea. A failed artist who happens to be a dwarf takes a job as an art teacher in an inner city school. By helping the students to accept themselves and be accepted by the schoolmates, he renews his own appreciation for the power of art, and they learn to believe in themselves. That's an example of the kind of premise you might have. That's actually a movie script that I'm working on that hopefully we're going to get Mr. Peter Dinklage in. It's basically, the inciting incident is that the artist gets an eviction notice from his landlord. Then he gets a job at a middle school teaching art, and that's the first turning point. When one of the other students destroys his most promising student's project, that's the midpoint. He has to change his attitude, and he has to get his students to change their attitude. That propels him to the rest of the story. The second turning point comes when he takes his students on a field trip to an art museum and finds out that they start acting like a family. They realize they're all in this together. They have a lot invested, and they all have the same goal. And then the climax, he confronts the disgruntled student who destroyed the project, and the principal invites him to have tenure after fighting him the entire story. That's kind of how things lay out when you use all of these things. So what do you need to know to develop the paradigm? Let's see if I put that diagram here. Yes, here it is. Okay. Who's your protagonist? Luke Skywalker in the case of Star Wars, if anybody doesn't know. Who is your antagonist? Darth Vader. What are their goals? Luke just kind of wants good things to happen for everybody, and he wants to, rescue whoever needs rescuing, but he wants to, make sure that the Empire doesn't win. That's kind of his goal. And then Darth Vader wants to make sure the Empire wins. I mean, I'm kind of cutting it down really to the chase, but you get the point. I'm simplifying. Now, what are the obstacles that each person faces in reaching their goal? The obstacles can be people. The obstacles can be events. The obstacles can be their own weaknesses, the strengths of somebody else. All those kind of things are obstacles. And then, what growth do they have to go through to succeed at reaching their goal? And then, you want to have some idea what you think your final confrontation needs to be. Now, something very important to remember about all of this. It's okay if things change as you write. In fact, I almost guarantee it. Because as you get more into your story and get to know your characters, you're going to realize things that you didn't realize before, and all of a sudden things are going to have to change. So, when you're putting this together, it's a rough idea of where you think your story is going right now when you put this diagram together. But the diagram you get at the end, after you know all of these things, may look very, very different, and that's okay. So I don't want you to go into this saying, oh, I have to make this work because I wrote it down and it's in the paradigm, okay? No, all the time I end up with a different plot point that I thought I did, or I end up with a different, confrontation or whatever. It's fine. If that's where the story needs to go, it's fine. It's just that it's good to have some idea in your head of where you're going so that everything you write can lead you to that direction. And it may invariably lead you slightly to a different direction too, but that's just the way it works when you write. Okay? So, those are all the things you need to know for 3-act structure. I know it's kind of a quick 10-minute course in it, but it's not that complicated. But does anybody have questions? No, but I mean, you're going to have an overall plot that's kind of the overarching plot, and you want to figure out which one's most involved in that, and that's the one you're going to go with. Here's the thing. I forgot to say this, and I'm glad you said that because I need to tell you this. Every plot in your story is going to be a 3-act structure effectively in most cases. It's going to follow this structure, okay? Whether it's a subplot or your main plot. You can break it down into those 3 sections, and it's going to have the same ascending and descending arc and the same key plot point moments if it's going to work, okay? Because drama is all about conflict, and the plot points basically identify your your inciting incident and climax, and they identify your key conflict that drives your story, okay? The conflict is going to be if you have a storyline that doesn't have any conflict in it, you got a serious problem. I had a guy who literally, I edited his novel and he didn't understand. The whole novel had no conflict. He's like, but they're having discussions and they don't always agree. Yeah, but it's like, I don't know, are there any children in here? It's like pussy conflict. I mean, it's not real conflict. It's just kind of like, I don't like your hair. Okay, whatever. You know what I mean? I mean, it's just not anything that was a major crisis thing. You've got to have serious conflict, and the conflict comes out of the characters. So, I want to date him. He's not gay. He doesn't want to date me. I think we're going to have a conflict there. You know what I'm saying? Or I want to date her. She doesn't find me at all attractive. There's a conflict. Or I want to have his shirt. He doesn't want to give it up. I mean, these are silly examples, but you get my point. There's always conflict. He wants to be doing the panel. I want to have his shirt. We have a little conflict here. Those kind of things. It's what you have to figure out what the point of conflict is for everybody. Every character, even the most minor characters, is going to want something different, and that's where it makes your story interesting as they come up and they clash, and that's your conflict. So this is about identifying your key points of conflict. Any other questions real quick on 3-act structure? Go ahead. Yeah.
What do you think about writers that break up the structure like Borges or even like Pulp Fiction, Tarantino, where you put the ending in the beginning and then
That's just like, you're talking about like a different linear structure of it. It doesn't mess up the structure. The structure still exists. He's just telling it in a different way. And it's a great way to build tension, and I personally think it's a very effective device. But he still had to think about his story in these terms before he could write that. There are various ways to break up your story, depending on what type, whether you're doing a thriller or a sci-fi or a romance or a different, whatever genre you're doing. Pretty much, here's the thing about writing rules. There's some rules that you're going to need if you want to be published by Random House or Simon & Schuster or the Big Five and any publisher that follows those guidelines, because there's industry standards. And then there's rules that basically you can throw out when you become Stephen King because you can do whatever the hell you want, okay? But when you're starting out, you need to learn all of these rules so you can figure out thoughtfully what you're doing and how it works. And then you can gradually begin to play with things and say, I'm going to put the ending in the beginning and I want to do, different things. I can play with it because his structure is so solid. It works great as a technique. If he didn't have that solid understanding, it wouldn't have worked. So the whole point of knowing these kind of things, and I use the term rules really loosely because it's really just about good storytelling techniques, okay? You need to know these things basically so that you understand how stories work. And this is the Western way of telling stories, guys, okay? Eastern people over in Asia and different places, if you hear some of their stories, They're very different, okay? Africa has some different styles too, but if they're writing in the Western convention, their stories will end up conforming to this model, because this is what the publishers kind of expect, okay? This kind of a structure. Now, there's a variance on this called a 4-act structure that we're going to talk about next. So let me get to that. 4-act structure, the difference between the two basically is that Act 2 is now 2 separate acts, okay? Everything's still 1/4, but Act 2 is 2 different acts. And the people who created this used the term establishing point instead of plot point. It's kind of the same thing, but basically the establishing point is a hero-ally moment, kind of usually some kind of moment in Act 1 where the hero and the ally confront and the hero is forced to give up a flaw that's holding them back, okay? That means that Act 2 becomes about establishing the relationship with the ally as the hero tries to resist the need to get rid of this flaw and hold on to it. And I'll explain more in a minute, okay? But this flaw has become an obstacle that has to be overcome. This structure, I should have said it in the beginning and I will say it now, is if you're doing a character-driven story, a very character-driven story, this is the structure that's going to fit it best, okay? Stories that have are not solely about character-driven, the 3-act structure tends to work better for. You'd be surprised, guys. I'm just telling you in general terms. Don't send me an email in like 3 months. Well, so and so did this with this, and you said this. Okay, fine. It's just some general guidelines to help you. Okay, because I get those emails all the time because it kind of annoys me. It's like, okay, don't be so literal, please. Anyway, the point is that this is character-driven. Now, in Act 3, you're going to have an establishing point where your flaw is resolved, and the hero enters the ring in preparation to confront the opponent for the final confrontation, the climax, as we see here, just as we did in the other diagram. So let me tell you how it lays out in a film. Hopefully you guys are familiar with a film called Rocky. It's one of the best structured films. It's an older film, I know that, but it's a classic. It's an Oscar-winning film, and this is the original Rocky, okay? I'm talking about, the one started it all, Rocky is about this guy who's kind of he's a wannabe boxer, but he's kind of a loser. He's never really made anything of himself, but he does have certain standards. He won't break legs for the loan sharks. He draws the line at that. He is given a chance to possibly fight the heavyweight champion of the world, and that's the first establishing point of the film. Is this worth me doing the work that's going to take to do it? And he has this Mickey, this mentor that comes along, played by Burgess Meredith, who basically says, I can help you get there. Do you want to do this? Okay? So Act 2 is all about him realizing that he doesn't believe in himself and his crisis of confidence, and him trying to train, but he's not believing in himself because in his back of his mind is echoing the stuff with his father telling him, you'll never make anything of yourself. You'll never be a decent boxer. You're never going to be anything. You're worthless. Okay? Some of us can relate to that. So this is the flaw that he quickly realizes he has to overcome, but he doesn't think he can. And so basically, the next establishing point, which is, by the way, the same as the midpoint in the 3-act structure, okay? The next establishing point is where he finally realizes, I don't have to be what my father said I was. I can be something I make myself into. And he finally says, okay, I'm going to do this. And that propels him into Act 3 with a final training where he builds his confidence and starts to really believe in himself and gets ready for this final fight with Apollo Creed, which happens then in Act 4, okay? That's how it lays out in the context of a overall story, basically, roughly, okay? So the mental preparation really drives him in Act 3, and then Act 4 is just the final fight with Creed, pretty much everything surrounding that, okay? So it's just another method that might be helpful to you if you're particularly doing a really strongly character-driven story to lay out structure. You know, I can actually take people's novels and tell which structure they primarily thought of when they were writing it, but I can also break it down into either of those two structures. I can break any novel down into a 4-act structure or any novel into a 3-act structure. So they're not counterproductive. They're not, you know, it's not one or the other. They kind of fit together. It's a different way of thinking about it, okay? All right. Any questions on 4-act structure? I know that was quick. Go ahead.
I had a question. How would these two structures be applied to an ongoing storyline like a comic or a TV series?
Well, you need to take the stuff that already exists and figure out where it fits on the structural line, or if it does. Usually it will. I mean, here's the thing about TV shows. Each individual episode is going to have a 3-act or a 4-act structure. Typically 4-act, actually. Most TV shows are divided into actually 4 acts, so it typically follows 4-act structure. But the overall season, or even, is going to also have a 3 or 4-act structure to it. The season itself, 23 episodes, whatever, okay? And then, how's this for a trip? The entire 6 seasons of the entire show that makes up the complete series also has a 3-act structure. See what I'm telling you? This structure underwrites everything in your story, no matter how big it gets. If you write 3 books, book 1, book 2, and 3 will each have a 3-act structure, but the trilogy itself will also have a 3-act structure. Okay, and you'll be able, if you do things well and manage your conflict well, you'll be able to see how that breaks down. That's where all this kind of got developed out of good storytelling techniques. And so all I'm doing is breaking it down and showing you how to think it through so you can be more conscientious in how you tell your stories. Other questions on 4-act?
For the sake of the example that you were giving, what was the third establishing point?
Third establishing point. What is it? Let's see. Did I write it down? Maybe I didn't write it down. Hold on. In Act 2. It's the end of his training when he realizes this is it. You know, he's gone as far as he can go. He's ready. He's going to confront Creed. I can do this kind of thing. Yeah. Was there another one back here? No? Go ahead. Wait a minute. You're saying the protagonist and the antagonist are the same person? And I've never seen a story that worked that was done like that. But I'm not saying you can't do it because, you can do anything if you do it well. Like a split personality, like Jekyll and Hyde kind of thing. So I guess I have seen a story that does it. Jekyll and Hyde. Okay. Jekyll and Hyde. There you go. See, I proved myself wrong within 30 seconds. How do you like that? Jekyll and Hyde. Hey, I never said I was perfect. Jekyll and Hyde, you're still going to have these 3 acts. Jekyll wants something and Hyde wants something. Very different, and they come in opposition to each other. So it still lays out. Now, there's going to be a plot. Here's the thing. Every character is, you've heard this, it's almost cliche, but every character is the hero of their own story. You've heard that said? Okay, so basically, if I took Darth Vader's story, I could break it into 3 acts. I could also take Luke's story and break it into 3 acts. I can also take the story of how they come together in conflict and break it into 3 acts. You see what I'm saying? All of this, any dramatic story that's well developed, you can find these parts. If you can't find these parts, there's probably a weakness in your story. So this is another technique you can use to analyze your story. Make sure you know what the 3 acts are for the individual storylines that are going on for your characters, as well as your overall book or short story or screenplay. Because you want to have this kind of structure so the story will work really well when it's all put together. Okay? All right, let's talk about scene structure. We've got like 15 minutes left, so let me get this going. Okay. The basic building block of dramatic structure for any story is a scene, all right? Each scene, if written correctly, is going to lead to another scene and another and another. And all well-written scenes use the following pattern. Statement of goal. 2, introduction of and development of conflict. And 3, failure of a character to reach the goal or tactical complication which creates a new goal. All really dramatic good scenes end in failure. I know that sounds like a bummer, but it's the truth, okay? They go in there with one goal and all of a sudden they find out they're not done yet. That's a failure, okay? But that propels you into the next scene where they, once again, okay, if I just do this, it'll be over. It's not, you see what I'm saying? That's what propels the story forward. That's how it works. So, you're going to start out with a character going into the scene with a goal. He knows what he has got to do. And then there's a conflict that comes up between him and another character or some obstacle he has to overcome to get that goal in that scene. And at the end, he realizes, he may have gotten over that one obstacle, but now there's a whole new obstacle and he's failed. He's not done yet. Okay? So the other thing about scenes is, at their heart, they have conflict. So, you've got to use the conflict to create the obstacles. So you want to make sure that when you set up your point of view in particular in novels, screenplays are a different story, but novels and short stories, you're going to pick a character's point of view. The character with the most to lose is probably the character that should be your point of view character for that scene, okay? Because they're going to have the most dramatic story in that scene, okay? So the character with the most to lose. So sometimes most of the time there's an overarching goal. Luke and Obi-Wan have to deliver these plans to the rebels so they can destroy the Death Star and save the galaxy, okay? But there's also individual goals. Okay, we've just got to figure out where the princess is. We've got to get to the Death Star so we can rescue the princess. Now we've got to figure out where the princess is in the Death Star and get there so we can rescue her. Then we got to get her back to our ship. You see what I'm saying? All these goals, some of them carry over in multiple scenes, but my point is that one goal leads to another. So that's basically how it works. Now, the other thing that you have to do with this is get into a scene as late as possible and get out as soon as you, I thought I had another diagram, I don't. Get into the scene as late as possible and get out as soon as you can. What I mean by that is, you don't want to start with a whole lot of, hey, how's it going? Hey, you don't want to start with the phone call, Ring, 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 ring. Hi, Mom, what's going on? Oh, yeah. How's the weather? How's Dad? How's Dad's? Yeah. How's his pelvis today? Nobody wants to watch or read that, Who cares? You want to start with, what? Dad fell and you had to take him to the hospital? What's going on, Mom? How did that happen? You see what I'm saying? You want to start where the drama is, okay? And then you want to get out as soon as possible. You want to get to the point where, okay, okay, well, maybe I can come in next week. I don't know, let me look at my calendar. I don't know. Mom, I'll get there as soon as I can. That's the end of your scene. You understand what I'm saying? You want to do that to drive the dramatic moments of your story. So you've got to figure out how to get in at the right point and get out at the right point. This will make you will find in so many novels and short stories from beginning writers, they have a lot of wasted space. They spend way too much time on stuff that isn't the core drama. If you just go and cut that stuff out ruthlessly, now, very important. When I say cut stuff out, don't erase it. Highlight it, cut and paste it into another document. I have a trash file for every book I work on where I basically put the stuff that I cut. I can't tell you how many times I've gone back and pulled stuff out of there and put it in somewhere else because I realized I needed it. So don't get rid of it. But you do need to kill your babies temporarily. And that means you need to pare it down. Pare it down to the essential drama and then see what's missing. And then you can go back and say, okay, I do need this bit of exposition that I cut, but where's the best spot for it? I do need this, moment. I'm telling you, you'll be amazed how it transforms your story and makes it so much more compelling. And then you just clean it up and figure out what you need to do to make it flow better with the cuts that you've made. It's a very effective technique. Basically, the key to plotting is a series of questions asked and answered, okay? Think about your plot. You're basically, something happens and it raises a question in the reader's or the viewer's mind, okay? Then that question has to be answered at some point. Anticipating the answer is what keeps me turning pages or keeps me watching your film, okay? Some of the questions are going to get answered in the same scene. Okay, there's a question at the beginning of the scene. Will he get the goal? Will he accomplish the goal? Okay, yes, he accomplished the goal. That's the answer. But wait, there's a new question that's just been arisen because he's got to do something else. Okay, this is pretty much what drives the underlying story. And you'll have a question that won't be answered that you ask at the beginning of any story, any movie or novel, that won't be answered till the end of the entire piece as well. Some questions don't get answered till the end of the chapter. The point is that this series, the way these questions unfold, is what drives people going. If you ever watch, when next time you're watching a movie or you're reading a book, just try to be conscious of the questions that it's raising that are making you, go and when they're answered, and you'll see how it drives things. So, the questions are always part of what the goals make the readers ask questions. So you always want to make sure the questions drive the story, and you want to make sure you answer all the questions. And that's what builds tension, is by keeping us guessing and not knowing the answer to certain questions for a certain length of time. We're like, oh God, I gotta find out what happened. Okay? If you answer it too soon, it's like, okay, well, there's none of the rest of the questions intrigue me, so I guess I'm done with this book. Anybody ever shut a book halfway through and said, I'm done? They didn't ask the right questions at the right time. They didn't do it right, okay? This is the psychology of dramatic storytelling, okay, that I'm talking about right now, okay? It's something you need. If you want to write well, if you want to tell stories well, you need to understand this. And it's not always keenly apparent. So, the goal of each scene, okay, needs to be clearly related to the larger story question. Okay? So every scene, there's a large story question that you ask at the beginning that you won't answer till the end of your entire novel or movie. Every scene needs to relate in some way to that question. Okay? It may be, slightly, but whatever the case, it needs to tie into it. Okay? It's the main goal that we're waiting for the answer for that drives the story. The conflict must be about the goal of each scene. The conflict may not be entirely about the main goal that I just said, the overarching goal, but it is definitely going to always be about the goal of that particular scene, and that's always going to be tied to the overall goal. So they're related, okay? The conflict needs to be either with an object, an animal, or a person, or more than one, okay? Sometimes it's internal, sometimes it's external. Most of the time it's going to be external because that's more dramatic, but it's going to drive the story. The point of view, sorry, I should have made a diagram of this, I apologize, but the point of view should be maintained from, it's in this, okay, it's all from here. So chapter 3, when you see plotting and scene structure, you can get all this. So don't worry about writing it all down. I'm just going to give it to you so it's kind of in your mind. Point of view needs to be maintained from goal to resolution in the same scene, okay? You don't want to skip point of views. Now, the exception might be when you've got a big battle scene and you're cutting between different characters. But even then, those are like little mini scenes, really, in effect. You've basically, sometimes what I do is I'll take and write a scene where, a certain character's confronting a dragon, right? And then over here, this guy's confronting this giant. And over here, this guy's confronting an orc, okay? And then I'll break, each of them will be a 3-act scene, but I'll break them into little pieces and I'll give you a section at a time so it keeps the story moving so you can see simultaneously what's happening in each of them at the same time. That's a technique. There's still a singular point of view in each of the many scenes that I'm talking about, okay? Remember that disaster always pushes a character away from his or her goal. So when you're creating a failure or a disaster, it's always pushing somebody away further from their goal. All right? Remember how I said they go into a scene and they're like, okay, cool, I got to accomplish this. And then they have that failure and they're like, crap, I'm not there yet. Push them further away. Okay? Remember that readers will tolerate a whole lot. This goes for viewers too, obviously. If you keep making things worse and worse in every scene, because, the suspense is what creates the compelling read. Okay? And then the final point is, since the end of each scene dictates what's going to happen after, you can't write a scene in isolation from the overall arc, the goals and conflict of the entire story that drives it, the main A plot, the through plot line that holds everything together, okay? So, there's a little bit on scene structure and plot. We have 10 minutes left. Do people have questions?
So when you say theater, the work down to the major plot points, and then add things back later. When you're first starting off of a novel in a series, there's a lot of world building that has to happen. Where do you insert that? Because that could be a lot of questions as well.
Yeah, but let me tell you something about world building. And I have a whole chapter of it in this book talking about how to do it. Most of the stuff that you need to know about your world to write your story well, you're never going to put on the page. All right? The biggest mistake that novice writers make is info dumping everything. And thinking that I have to know everything. The only thing I need to know right now for this scene is what I need to know to understand this scene. Everything else, you need to cut. Don't tell me about it till I need to know it. Now, the exception to that is foreshadowing, but it's only done really briefly. For example, in one of my stories, I knew I was going to have airships. It was an epic fantasy, but the airships don't appear for several chapters. But earlier in a scene, I had a character pass a sign when he was on his journey that said airship landing strip, airship landing strip that way. All right? He's like, oh, they have airships. Okay. It doesn't become a big plot point, but now I've just told people what they need to know. So later when the airships show up, people don't say, God, he's just making this up as he goes. All of a sudden there's airships in this world. You see what I'm saying? That's a way to foreshadow in a way that makes it natural and inherent in the world. So you've got to figure out with yes, you've got to give us all that world building. You've got to give it to us when we need it and no sooner and no later. And there's a bunch of stuff we won't need. Maybe we'll need it in a book too. So keep a world building file, and like I said, you never know when you're going to need it.
One side follow-up to that, though, if I may. Would you say those things are best spoken by characters or just shown?
Oh, well, everything in my world, everything's better shown if you can show it, because it's far more effective and dramatic. But sometimes little details are easier to dispense with in dialogue. It's just easier to this is my brother John. He's gay. Okay, that do we really need a gay sex scene at that point in your novel? I'm not saying there's anything wrong with gay sex scenes, but look. You're at the beginning of the book, and just because you want to show the character's gay, you're going to have a sex scene, and it comes out of nowhere. It's totally going to disrupt the flow of your novel, right? So just have somebody say, my brother John is gay. Later when we find out he's gay, maybe we have a sex scene, maybe we don't. But the point is, the way to establish that he's gay is not to do this whole big dramatic scene that shows that he's gay. You can just say it. You see what I'm saying? So you have to decide which moments it's appropriate to do that with and which not. Go ahead. Foreshadowing. Oh, sorry, I was pointing to let's get her first. Or him, sorry.
Talking about the point of view stuff, you said you could separate it into little mini scenes. Do you still have a structural break between each shift point of view so the reader knows it's a different point of view?
I mean, yes, I have to write transitions so that it feels like it flows, but that's a matter of learning style and prose. And it's
But you don't necessarily have 3 asterisks or skip a line or whatever.
those scene breaks? Yeah, usually they put those in. Sorry, that's just a formatting thing. Sorry. You go ahead, and then I'll get you.
So you do editing as well, and so I guess how do you find a good editor, and when do you know it's worth paying money for an editor? So not someone who's just going to correct spelling mistakes, but actually help you improve the content.
Boy, cancel the next panel. This is going to be a long. No. Here's the basic way. All right. If I want to find a good editor, I go to me. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. No. I'm actually the worst editor for my own work. I am the worst editor for my own work, and you will be for your own. But you want to find out who edits who. You want to do a little research. On Twitter or Facebook, you can ask an author who worked with you on your book. Andy Weir's always sending me clients because I worked with him before he sold his book. And you can ask, then you want to ask the editor how they do their work, maybe even ask them for a sample. Most editors who are worth their salt will give you a sample edit, just show you a few pages of what they do so you know their style. And then you want to get an estimate of what it's going to cost and figure out if it's in your budget. It's most likely, for most average novels, it's going to cost you about $1,000, maybe more. Okay, I mean, the typical rate is $50 an hour. I usually work between 45 and 60, and I will charge you more if it's going to be more work. If you're a worse writer, you're going to pay me more. Why? Because I'm going to have to do a lot more work on your book. Okay, but you just ask people and get references, and you can check to see there's a lot of freelance editors who also are basically moonlighting as freelance, and they work at publishers. You can see kind of just the same way you do due diligence on anything else. You had a question? Go ahead.
When you are working on a rough draft, got the rough draft ready, is there a stage in the process of editing it, like the first pass of the structure and the next something else?
I used to have to break down. He's asking. I'm sorry. I probably should have been repeating these questions because I just realized if I have trouble hearing them, you probably can't. Sorry. Too late now. He's asking if there's like stages of editing. When you're going back, do you work on one particular aspect of the story craft at a time on different passes? I used to work that way. My first novel, I did like 19 passes because I was learning all these new kinds of craft, and I'd be like, oh, well, now I need to go back and work on this, and now I need to work on that, all right? But over time, you're going to internalize it, and it'll become part of your overall process to the point where you'll start looking at all of it at once. But sometimes, I go back and do an edit just for repetitive words and things like that. That's the last thing I do, for example. And the way I do that is I read my book aloud, because trust me, when you're reading it aloud, it forces you to read every word. When you're reading it quietly, your mind looks at the minimum number of words and then comes up with the most logical sentence. Okay? That's why on Facebook, if you've ever had one of those things like where it's like, Tom has 3 little pins in his pocket, but you read Tom has 3 little penises in his pocket. It's because for some reason your mind decided the most logical sentence was penises instead of pins. It's totally the way our minds work. It helps us read faster. You're not reading every word. It's also why you can totally miss so many typos over and over again when you're rereading your work because you know it so well. So if you sit down and you read it aloud, it will force you to. The best way to read it aloud, to really force you so you don't get swallowed up in the story and get lost, is to read it backwards. Start with the last paragraph, read that. Fix anything you need to fix. Then read the next to the last paragraph and work your way back through your book. It sounds nuts, but the thing is, you can't get lost and caught up in your story and all that stuff and start skipping stuff because you know what's going to happen next if you're reading it backwards because it doesn't make any sense. So then you're literally just focusing on the words on the page and the grammar and all that. Okay.
And the most important question, where can people find you next?
Where can people find me next?
Do you have a booth? Are you going to
I
be?
do not have a booth, unfortunately. I will have a panel tomorrow.
Excellent.
You can find me at BryanThomasSchmidt.net. You can find me a panel tomorrow called The Future as I See It with Timothy Zahn and a whole bunch of really cool authors. And you can find me at a signing after that in sales at AAO6 at 11:30 tomorrow. I'll be doing signing. My books are available at Mysterious Galaxy. They're also available online. I have about 25 of them out there, so there's a bunch of them. And, otherwise I'll just be walking around. But if you're looking to find me to edit, there's an editing link on my website. You can find out all the things you need to know there. Or you do want to just contact me and ask me questions, feel free. Feel free to comment on the blog post that are all these lessons with further questions or comments or stuff. I do police my blog, so if you're going to troll me, you're going to get deleted. I'm not going to respond. It's just going to go away. So just keep that in mind if somebody's wanting to, have a little fun. I just don't have time for it. I try to create a positive space to help writers and help other people, and that's what I try to do with my life, and that's what I try to do with my blog. So I just don't waste time with it. But
Let's have a hand for Bryan Schmidt. Thank you so much for excellent panel. If you are making your way out, the exit is that back corner there. Please
thank you for coming. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for coming.
Good luck with your writing, and I hope this helps you. Yeah. Do you want me to stand up over here somewhere? Yeah.